aircraft you've got so small. You've got
Okay, so first impressions of the cabin, is it bigger than you thought, smaller than you thought? Smaller, yeah? You think it's bigger? It's not too bad for a supersonic jet, is it? So as you can see, Concorde is extremely long. You can see right down to the back there. You can see right down to the back there. So it's almost the same length as a 777. But of course the 777 is 6.5 times wider. So Concorde was built for one thing, and that was for speed. There's 40 seats in the front here, 60 in the back, so 100 seats in total, but they were all Concorde class. Seats, even though the military sit backwards, and most cabin crew, you'll notice, will sit backwards as well. So that's the reason for the tiny one, because it was all black and white world at that time. Black and white TVs and no remote controls and no computers. And it was amazing that the engineers built Concorde that was going to fly at Mach 2, which is twice the speed of sound, up to 60,000 feet, 11 miles high off the ground. Were business people, and they used it to travel between the two financial centres, so London and New York. So London and New York, of course, normally it's going to take you maybe 6-7 hours to get there, subsonic flight. On Concorde, it took less than 3.5 hours. The fastest ever crossing from JFK to Heathrow, 2 hours, 52 minutes and 59 seconds. So an amazing speed for the passengers. Of course they left, not that many people had them, fixed on desks and fixed in houses. So it's a world that you probably don't really recognise or relate to, yeah. Back to the future. That's right, yeah. So that was what it was like then in them days. So of course that's probably why the most travelled passenger ever on Concorde is a businessman. His name is Fred Finn, and Fred Finn flew 718 trips on Concorde. So an amazing amount of trips on Concorde. So we were just talking a bit about how Concorde's speed was determined by how cool they could keep the airplane.
Two seats, so you can sit either there or in the captain's seat, whichever you want to sit on.
Right, well you have it this time. I had it when we went in the Vulcan a little while ago.
Oh, crikey me, that's a bit tight to get in there.
It was, I tell you.
Yes, take a seat there, yeah. Oh, you've got all the gear, camera and...
Yeah, it's a wide angle camera.
Oh, right. Are you okay there, sir?
yes, yeah. I presume this was the flight engineers.
Yes, it was. It doesn't. The seats, well, they're all electric, so we know. Although we've got lights on, it's all off the mains. It's not the X.
I'll crouch.
Yeah, if you crouch, if you're happy, yeah.
Swap round in a minute. I'll go. It's back.
You're not like me. You get down on your knees, you can't get up.
Get down and won't be getting up again.
Yeah. Okay, so welcome to the flight deck. We have a crew of 3. So we have the captain sits in the left-hand seat, co-pilot, first officer in the right-hand seat where I am, and we have a flight engineer sits there, and he operates all the systems. He's probably the busiest chap on the flight deck. And then when you're sitting, madam, is known as the jump seat or spare seat, and that is it was used by company personnel or regulators, but it was also, this aircraft flew prior to them mandating locked flight deck doors, so a lot of the passengers used to come up here. So we have it on very good authority that the Queen Mother has sat there with her gin and tonic. John Travolta, people like that, quite a lot of pop stars and people in the entertainment industry. Okay, so we'll look in the flight deck here. This is the captain's instrumentation. So at the top we have the artificial horizon, so that gives you the attitude of the aircraft. Below that the compass, which tells you what direction it's going in. Over to the left we have the airspeed indicator and the Mach meters, that's telling you how fast you're going in nautical miles per hour, and the one in the Mach is relative to the speed of sound. This one here, that's for rate of climb or descend. Basically it's telling you how fast you're going up or down. If you're pointing at the blue, you're climbing, you're okay. If you're pointing at the black, you're descending. And then the two instruments to the right is the altimeters. You've got one radio altimeter, which is used primarily close to the ground because it's more accurate, and the barometric altimeter, which is fed from the sensors on the nose of the aircraft, nose and under the door of the aircraft. It's exactly the same on this side, mirror image for the first officer. The control columns are interconnected, so you can fly the aircraft quite comfortably from either left or right seat. You can also taxi the aircraft because you've got the tiller here and the tiller there. That controls the nose wheel. The only thing you've got to remember is you sat quite high here and your nose wheel is about 35 feet behind you, so the crews were always instructed, please do not cut corners, otherwise you're putting the main gears on the grass. And if you've got the Queen Mum on board or royalty, or it could be tea and biscuits with the chief pilot. Up here we have the autothrottle, and then across here the autopilot. Quite a sophisticated autopilot considering the sort of the age of the aircraft. It's built in the 60s and 70s, so they haven't got this computer powers then. Unique to this aircraft, this lever here, and this operates the nose. In this position the visor is up. It's up purely and simply for supersonic cruise, reduce the drag. But what you can do, first position, the visor will actually translate forward and hide itself in the nose. Second position, it drops down 5 degrees for taxi takeoff, and finally it goes down 12.5 for coming into land, because you're coming into land like a swan at a very high angle, so you don't want that thing sticking in the way. It's pure and simply for pilot visibility. I can just show you a picture I have here. And this is you can see this is down at 5 degrees, and you can see where the visor's translated forward into the nose. That was actually at Barbados. He used to fly to Barbados. Princess Margaret used to go there a lot, apparently. And then this is actually a view of from the right hand seat when this aircraft was coming into land at Manchester. You can see that's the new runway, what we call the new runway there. So as you can see, once you've got the nose down, it's quite good visibility. Okay. We've got 4 throttles and 4 reverse levers, so you can reverse the engines for braking on landing. Again, unique to this aircraft is these switches here, which were sort of known as the piano keys for quite obvious reasons. But this is reheat or afterburner, depending on which side of the Atlantic you are. Basically what you're doing is the jet exhaust is you're setting it to light again. So what it does is give you an extra 6,000 pounds of thrust per engine. So it's quite a bit of an increase in thrust. The downside is it creates one heck of a lot of noise, and it also increases your fuel consumption from roughly 100 gallons per minute to 200 gallons per minute. So it's quite judicious use of this. So they use this for takeoff. You ever saw the Concorde take off, you'd see the flames in the jet pipe as you would on a jet fighter. And then once they got to safe altitude, they'd switch them off. They'd also use them to move from what they call over the sound barrier from subsonic speed to supersonic speed. Okay, so they weren't used only a couple of stages of flight.
Did Concorde Super Cruise, it didn't require reheat when it was flying?
No, once it was supersonic, yeah, it's quite sophisticated. Carol will probably tell you more when you're looking around the engines, but the engine's intakes and the exhausts and the bucket create quite a lot of thrust themselves, so it's quite a sophisticated system there. We've got the flight engineers panel here. So the flight engineer, he looked after all the systems. So over the far side you've got electrics, hydraulics, then you've got air conditioning, pressurization coming over to the left here, intake controls here, fuel in the middle. They use fuel for, I don't know if Carol's already told you, but they use fuel for balancing the aircraft. So the flight engineer had what was known as a centre of gravity indicator there. So his job was to move the fuel around to actually balance the aircraft to keep the centre of gravity within the parameters. Another thing with this aircraft, because it flew so fast, it creates an awful lot of what we call kinetic heating. And on the nose it's limited to 127 degrees centigrade. That is pretty damned hot. Even on the sides of the aircraft, by the the cabin windows, 90 degrees centigrade. What happens when you heat metal? It expands, and you can actually see the expansion in the flight deck. If you see where my pointer is, you can't get your finger in that gap, can you?
No.
But if I show you do my Blue Peter bit here, show you the pictures. On this first picture you can see he's put his hand in.
Oh, look.
Because the aircraft's as it's gradually heated up, it's moved up, and he can get his hand in. And on the second picture I've got here, it's gone even further, and he's actually got the flight engineer's put his hat in there. And we have it on very good authority that the final flight from Heathrow to Bristol, the last aircraft to fly, and it was made at Bristol. Guy put his hat in there, and then of course when it landed, you know, and it's cooled down, it's contracted, and then of course they decided to put two in. So you have to, well, they have to put that fuel panel in the middle. To get in first before you move the panel back.
The feature about the Vulcan though was it didn't have a control yoke, it had a joystick,
It
like
did,
a fighter.
yes.
So
Yeah.
was that a decision made early in the design?
I believe so, yes,
Yeah.
because you know you haven't got room to.
Yeah.
Yeah. The tin triangle, as we used to call it in the Air Force. Yeah, you want to take your pictures? Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I'm just looking now at the pilot seat.
Where did you see the Vulcan? Super soft.
It's going to be a lot
The-
smaller than this one.
Let's do a bit of basic maths. Weight acts down, lift acts up. What happens is that as you accelerate, the lift moves backwards.
Yeah.
Obviously the weight stays the same, so if the lift's moving backwards, the nose will tend to dip.
And that was
And you've no flaps or slats, or you know elevate, you've no tailplane on this. So what they did is they moved fuel from the front of, well, so you've got in the midpoint of the aircraft actually, there's fuel tanks where the sort of lead against the wing is. And then there's a tank right at the very back. Carol will show you that as you walk around at the back, just underneath the BOAC
just
sign.
changing the centre
So
of
they move the
gravity.
centre of gravity
Yeah.
from front to rear. So they move fuel from front to back. And he does this by, they've got 13 fuel tanks in the aircraft. So basically moves it from that front tank to the back. So that then brings the weight back and lines it up. So when they're actually accelerating, he's moving fuel from front to back.
Right.
And when they're decelerating, he's moving fuel from back to front. It's a French invention. But they have got sort of limited trim with the elevons.
Yep.
As you can see with this, it's yeah, you got the
When we're-
yeah. It was the French that come up with this moving fuel.
Yeah. It's actually it's quite a working. It's a very useful working environment. I mean,
Oh, you talked to the pilots. I loved it.
Yeah.
I mean,
even with the seatbelt and all that kind of thing, it's actually
Yeah.
it's way roomier than, well, the Vulcan.
yeah.
Okay, we'll go down underneath. Extremely long legs, Concorde is very comfortable on the ground. The nose gear, Concorde is forward at the table. If the nose gear is upwards and backwards, of course, you'll be fighting against the aerodynamic gravity simply impossible. This food is something much, much more important than bags, and that's fuel, yes. So you have 13 fuel tanks on board. So roughly 5 down each side, 2 in the middle and 1 in the tail. The fuel is used, of course, to fuel the engines, but not only that, it's used to keep the aircraft flying level. So the engineer would be moving fuel from around the 13 fuel tanks. However, no engine can accept air into its turbines at the speed that it will be approaching Concorde. So remember, Concorde's flying through the air at Mach 2, 1300 miles per hour. The air that's entering here is travelling much too fast for the turbines to cope. So they had to slow it down. You can see the ramps there and where they would come down to during the flight. Now inside this air intake was one of the first electrically operated computer systems to ever be used on an aircraft, and during the flight it controlled these ramps. So these ramps would come down. Of course, when the air hit the ramp, it would disrupt the airflow. The air molecules would break off in all different directions, and also it was warm in there. So with the warm air, the air expanded